Jeff with the People Not Titles podcast, and it is absolutely my pleasure today to have attorney Michael Mazek with us. Mike, welcome to the podcast. Welcome to the program.
Thanks, Steve.
Glad to have you. We're going to get right into it, and we're going to talk about Mike's career and all that, but you might be wondering why we are wearing soccer uniforms. And Mike came into the podcast here bearing gifts. Mike, let's just talk about the unique networking opportunity we had over the spring. And was it what did it start?
Yeah, a little bit in the winter. Started in the fall, went through the winter and the spring. We over the years, I noticed I wear casual shoes sometimes around the office, and I'll wear some soccer shoes. Not a very good soccer player, but I've worn those shoes over the years. People have made comments. I've learned that there's a lot of people in the real estate community that love playing soccer, and as a result, those people then reached out to me at various points, and I said, you know what, I'm just going to do a meetup group. I'm going to do an online notification, send some emails out, see if people wanted to play some soccer, and they did, and they came out in droves, and that's how we wound up playing together, and it was a blast.
Yeah. So, So, Mike, did you play soccer before?
Really never. I mean,
wow,
my family's
that's pretty impressive.
My family's from Poland, so they played a lot of soccer growing up, very recreationally. I remember going to Grant Park for festivals in Chicago and things like that, and you just sort of play some soccer with people that were there and some family members and things like that. But when I got older, I played in a couple like rec leagues at the Chicago Fire Pitch. They had a great like lunchtime soccer meetup, and that was kind of what inspired this. It was very relaxed. You'd show up at noon on a Friday, and you'd play soccer with people in the area, and it was a lot of fun. And that kind of, I hadn't done that in a while, and it kind of reminded me that this is a good opportunity for that. There were plenty of people in the real estate world that not only just played sort of recreational soccer, but I found out that there were plenty of people that played various levels of highly competitive soccer. So collegiate soccer, in some cases, certain levels of professional soccer as well. And we had some of those folks out, and it was great.
Yeah, and so, Mike, let's just talk about how did I qualify for this shirt? When we first started,
speaking, when we first started this, it was just a handful of real estate agents. A handful of real estate agents, myself, my fiance, and we went out, and I think it was 6 or 7 people that first outing, and it was in the fall, and then people started talking to each other, and then we noticed that it wasn't just real estate agents, it was lenders, title people, and it started to grow and grow, and so from the title side of things, we thought we gave away some awards. We gave away best male player of the year, female player of the year, league MVP, and then why stop there, right? People like awards. So we had a title division and a lender division, and from all the title folks that came out, Steve was the best.
Yeah, dozens and dozens, hundreds of title folks.
Right.
I fought my way to the top.
About 2 or 3, but
even though I injured,
Yeah, that was that Willis Reed moment where you got hurt and you were out there playing, and that might have sealed the deal.
Yeah.
I think that really brought the votes in.
Yeah, it was just like the Willis Reed moment, except for I never came back.
right.
I went into the locker room and I never came back, but I am back now. So
and so this was sort of the award. We figured we'd get you kind of a custom jersey.
Thank you.
From one of your favorite teams,
Man U.
players.
And Land Trust Title Services, proudly pronounced.
Right.
If we need to blur it out, it's not fully licensed, but nevertheless.
Maybe, and who knows, maybe this creates a unique sponsorship for Man U and Land Trust.
Absolutely.
That they wouldn't have otherwise known about.
Yeah. It might be the only Chicagoland real estate podcast that is unofficially sponsored by Manchester United.
That would be wild. The numbers would increase dramatically.
All right, Mike, so let's get into it. So you have a real estate law practice, and you do other law as well, but let's talk a little bit about your early career, how you got started in your legal practice.
Yeah, so I grew up in Chicago. My family's from Poland, and like many first-generation immigrants in Chicago, my family would always buy a building, with friends or cousins. So we dealt with co-ownership agreements at a very early age, and I was the first person in my family to speak English. So I worked with my family on a lot of those items. In particular, whenever there was a building that was purchased, many families will have a multi-unit building where you're living in one of the units, renting out perhaps one or two other units. And so from a very early age, I remember doing lease review and lease modifications, perhaps way too early, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old. But it was something that I was drawn to immediately. I also found that
Wait. You were 9 and 10 and 11 years old, and you're reviewing these leases?
Doing lease modifications.
Wow,
yeah.
buddy. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
You're like Doogie Howser.
right. Except not quite as smart, but it was still, like, I always found it to be really interesting because this was really important for a lot of the families that were there. And so, including our family, where you lived at the time, your accessibility and ability to get to work, to generate an income for your family. Those are all things that I found were all connected. Real estate sort of connected all of those things. And so, the lease review and sort of drafting a lease for a family, sometimes it was more than just the document that was there in front of us. And so I started to take that belief into the legal practice, that there are these documents, these transactional pieces that if you just stack them up, they start to become rote, and it's not necessarily something that stands out. But the reality is, on a real estate contract, there are so many pieces in play and so many people involved. So the people that are moving, people that are going to live there, a new life begins essentially when you move into a new neighborhood, the people you meet, the relationships you form. So I was inspired by this small section of transactional work to bring that to my practice. And when I first started, it was right around 2009. I was doing some litigation related to false disclosure cases and some estate planning, and then the transactional work started to develop out of that. So I started that year. A few years earlier, it was actually at a Cubs game. Speaking of things related to sports, it's everywhere. But I wound up sitting next to somebody at a Cubs game that was a mutual friend, and he was starting to take steps to transition out of his practice. And he and I just spoke about different things that we wanted to do. I wound up working for him for a few years, and then he eventually partially retired. He's still involved in the business, in his business.
So you didn't take over his practice. You began, or did
yeah,
you?
I mean, so I don't mean to be secretive either. It's Joseph Semmerling. He's one of the best attorneys I've ever known, and I was very lucky to meet him and cross paths with him. He's great, and he had essentially sort of a neighborhood real estate practice on the northwest side of Chicago in the North Center neighborhood. And but he, with a neighborhood practice, you get all sorts of cases, so personal injury cases, Social Security, disability, all kinds of stuff that just walks in. Whereas when I first started, I was practicing in a small office in the Loop that was on the 15th floor, 18th floor. Nobody was going to walk in. You sort of had to generate your own business. This was also something that fit with what I was looking to do, which was to go beyond the paperwork and just actually interact with people and have meaningful relationships in the community. So he had that practice for about 30 years. And so he essentially let me take over, but he was still involved in certain cases and things like that. So to this day, we talk to each other pretty regularly, and he gives me advice, and I work on some of his cases. That's kind of how, but ultimately, at this point, like my practice has included some of the areas that he worked on, including estate planning and some litigation. That's really the extent of my practice. We do real estate transactions, litigation related to real estate, estate planning, tax appeals, and certain things related to real estate.
Mike, I've interviewed a lot of people, and I think it's really profound that you have a desire to build relationships, and I like it going beyond the paperwork, because the paperwork is just the paperwork, but there are a lot of lives involved and a lot of dreams, goals, aspirations of real estate, right? We call it the American dream. And so, and I would say that's the way I've experienced you, and I think that's the way your clients experience you. So I would say bravo to you for fulfilling your mission in that regard,
And it makes the day-to-day so much more valuable.
Interesting.
It really does.
Yeah.
When you get a transaction in, there's a story for that person. And so, reaching out to the client early on, I do regularly ask, well, what inspired your move? And we have a conversation about, how it got to this point. Because by the time an attorney gets a real estate contract, a lot has already happened. There's been negotiation on price, closing date, all those things. Perhaps even the hardest work is already done. So by the time I get a contract, we're clarifying certain things during attorney review and making sure that the agreement matches the goals of the client. The only way you can do that is if you know what the client's goals are beyond just this transaction. So, are you moving here long term? Is it your goal, for instance, to buy this condo and then move into a bigger building and then rent out this condo? In that case, we have to go and review the decks and bylaws and make sure that you can rent it out. So there are all these longer term things that we try to take into account when we get a file.
Mike, do you, how do you view Chicago real estate right now? Like, what's happening? Chicago's been through some big changes, right? Over the last couple of years through COVID and that kind of thing. What's your viewpoint? What's the vibe in the city? I'm out in the suburbs. You're right there in the heart. What do you feel about all that?
Yeah, it's so interesting because there is a perception, even nationally, about certain things associated with Chicago, whether that's the political climate or other aspects of the city. But there's never been a shortage of people who want to live in Chicago. For every time that there's some sort of news story about people leaving Chicago or whatever, population-wise, the numbers indicate that the number of transactions during a time when perhaps it's been suggested that people are leaving, there's no shortage of transactions. There are still people moving into the state, moving into the city. And so overall, some of that can be looked at when it relates to homes being bigger. So perhaps a multi-unit building that used to have 6 to 8 people now turned into a single family home that's been renovated and gutted. Now it's only 2 to 4 people. So you can certainly point to some of the population decline in the state as a whole, but there's no shortage of people that want to live in Chicago, particularly with, we did see, and I saw from 2019 to now, a lot of people in our industry saw really the full cycle. In 2019, you may have represented somebody, or you may have worked with a family that moved into the city, right? They bought their first home, their first condo, and then during the pandemic may have needed to didn't have a need to be in person, and therefore moved to the suburbs or moved further away from Chicago, maybe even to another state. And then with the reality of hotel desk situations, or at least some need to be in person again, that family may have to come back. And so I've had transactions where I've seen the
people
full
left
cycle.
And they've gone back. They've come back.
Yeah. So I've seen come to the city, leave, and then come back. And we're certainly seeing a lot more people now who didn't have a need during the pandemic to be in person for work, who now have a need to be closer to the loop or closer to the city. And so we're seeing a lot of that over the last 6 months or so.
Yeah, and the loop where it was once a ghost town is not a ghost town anymore.
Right.
It's buzzing and it's thriving,
and some of that is for political reasons too. The city has incentive to make sure that the loop is active. The businesses around there can flourish. They can pay their tax dollars. People can go spend money at the grocery stores and restaurants, and they can pay the taxes associated with that meal, and then that benefits the city. So there is certainly, from a political standpoint, there's a need to have the loop be an active metropolis. But in terms of the pattern of it now, I think it's still on the way up. It seems like that's still happening, where some of the West Loop and South Loop condos that slowed down for a little bit now are active again.
Okay. Mike, too, a lot of times, and I just see that you're a collaborative guy, a lot of times people look at legal work or whatever as, someone has to win and someone has to lose, and talk about your philosophy of maybe just getting to the closing table.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And so we do litigation, and so I'm certainly on files where we know that we have to show our teeth. We have to make sure that the other side is aware that we're not backing down on an issue. And that tends to come on the litigation side of things. On the real estate transactional side of things, it's really interesting because the hat has to change a little bit. You know, we are working together to reach a common goal. And most of the time, like I said, the hardest work has already been done. By the time there are adversarial attorneys out there, just like there, you know, there are personalities and everything that are going to affect the transaction in a certain way. But to come in with an adversarial mindset, it never really helps the client. The clients came to an agreement on the key terms. They came to an agreement on the location, purchase price, closing date, financing terms. Those are the most important terms. And in residential transactions, there's a reason that those terms are highlighted first and ironed out, and then the attorneys get involved. It's not to submarine deals or to sort of let arguments result in deals falling apart. So it is a bit more collaborative, you know, and there is an increased effort now to sort of meet and have a conversation about discrepancy, particularly if clients are fighting aggressively on a particular issue. Because you know, during the pandemic, you weren't really interacting with people as much. Everything was remote. And I found that things just tended to not get resolved as quickly as they could. These days, a phone call is huge, and it's not really happening all that much, but it's happening more. Where, you know, you call the other side, and they're not necessarily your opponent in a real estate transaction. They're just the other side, and you reach out and say, "Look, we're fighting over $500. I understand your position. This is our position. You know, is there an opportunity for us to meet in the middle, or to make some sort of alternative resolution?" And that kind of conversation goes a long way, because ultimately the parties that are involved are at the height of their tension when it comes to the transaction. During attorney review, there is this risky time where either party can terminate the agreement. So you may have reached an agreement on all the key terms. This is a $650,000 transaction, but now the tension is so high because we don't know. Are we done with attorney review? Is this seller going to take a backup offer? Is there something that's going to happen to derail this? I've already invested my time in an appraisal, inspection. So it is important to make sure that the clients are kind of aware of what's going on, and then just bring the parties together to the extent that they can. Sometimes it's just not going to happen. And sometimes that's part of advising the client too, you know, to say there's no way that we can get what you're asking for given the circumstances. We can try, and we'll put our best forward for that. But in some markets, when it's a market like we've had for many years here, you know, sellers just don't have to do much. But that's shifting too. You know, the last few weeks in particular, we've seen a big shift there.
And talk about that. What kind of shift have you seen?
Yeah, so sellers understanding that due to the rate increases that this isn't, you know, the ideal seller's market the way that it was for probably almost 2 years. And
people were lining up.
Yeah,
Multiple offers,
open houses,
even list price offers or list price and above offers. That might be changing, right?
Yeah, think about that. I mean, think about, I used to wonder where we had clients that would win out on a multiple offer situation for an open house where there was 20 to 30 people in line. You just didn't have an opportunity to ask the questions that you would normally. You didn't get a chance to go and inspect the property and perhaps ask for some credits or repairs. You didn't get a chance to even negotiate appraisal gaps and things like that. You'd have to sort of give in and just say, "This, I have to buy this, and this is the only chance I have." So the amount of pressure that creates for a buyer, and then on the other side of it, for the seller, we have a seller that probably believes this is the best time, perhaps in our lifetimes, to sell real estate. Yeah. That it was probably from the money that was generated on a sale, this may have been the best time. And if there were any questions or issues, and that took the property off the market for a little while on an as-is transaction, and then the buyer asked for certain repair items, for example, that seller had so much pressure to go get that backup offer now, or reach out to that backup offer, and there was so much pressure on both sides, it caused a lot of conflict. And that's not even just in real estate. In other areas of the law and other areas of life, you know, people were just under a lot of pressure and stress. But it is certainly changing. Sellers are more willing to negotiate these days, knowing that there might be fewer buyers if the interest rates are higher. It's not much. I haven't found it to be. There's certainly no, you know, significant change, but it is, in the last few weeks, it's changing a little bit, where sellers are willing to make certain repairs. I remember, you know, when I started, you know, between 2000 2009 to 2013, I mean, there was a time where a buyer would just submit the inspection report, and the seller would say, "Yes, I'll do everything. Thank you, please.
Mm-hmm.
I'll take care of everything. No questions asked." But then it shifts the other way.
The worm is turned.
Yeah, we've seen many different cycles in the real estate world. I think we're leveling out a little bit, but it's still the number of buyers versus the number of properties that are available. It's just still it's uneven still.
So Mike, you're an attorney, when you have a law practice, but you're also a businessman.
Mm-hmm.
That you're running your own business. Are there any, and a lot of times we have people that are in sales, or we have people that run their own small business or larger business that are viewing or listening. Is there any tips that you have, or any practices that you've implemented to be in terms of being a businessman that have been really served you well?
Yeah, it's hard. On the legal side of things, I've certainly worked with people who are great attorneys and perhaps not great business people. It is hard to sort of mesh the two. Mm-hmm. But one of the areas that we look at that might apply to other businesses is there's usually the beginning stages of the interaction with the client. So whether it's intake or whether it's a phone call to a bakery or whatever, there's sort of that initial connection. And then there's usually a little bit of a lull. There's usually the in-between. So for us on the attorney side of things, it might be the end of attorney review in anticipation of closing. And then the event usually takes place. So for us, it's the real estate closing. And so much emphasis is put on the first two moments, when you get the client and the event, the closing. But it seems like a real difference maker is the in-between. And so even the quieter times when the closing is approaching, that tends to be when, in a stressful situation like a real estate transaction, that tends to be when the most urgency comes up, the most questions. Hey, I haven't heard from anybody. That makes me nervous.
Am I on track?
Yeah, exactly. So we've tried over the years to implement certain metrics for that and certain ways to go and reach out to the client. There's a few other ways that we're going to implement here in the coming months. But it seems like that's really a difference maker, probably in just about any industry. So when nothing is happening, or when seemingly nothing is happening, or maybe things are happening behind the scenes, those are the moments that any connection with the client it levels it out, and it makes it such a complete transaction.
Mm-hmm. That's great. I'm a big believer too that more and more so with people not attending closings. The room used to be a big party with everyone there, agents, lenders, blah blah blah. Now the sellers hardly, never show. Sellers' attorneys don't need to, because and there's so much work done outside of that hour. It really is a little ridiculous to kind of pigeonhole it all to that one moment when that moment is no longer.
Yeah, it's definitely a different kind of atmosphere. It's not. It's definitely not the same. I mean, we've been limited with the number of people who could physically be in a room together.
Sure.
We attend all our closings in person, and that's helped to give us a connection with the client again. It was hard to just do things over the phone or via Zoom when you're trying to develop a relationship with a client. It's just hard to do that. But it is true that the event itself now is better. Mm-hmm. Like we've certainly experienced it on the title side. When you go to a closing, it's a more interactive experience. I remember a few weeks ago I was at the CLE event that you guys hosted, and it was great. But one of the things you talked about was just the customer service experience. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it's true. I regularly I'll talk to clients when we're having a bad closing, and I'll have to deflect some of the perhaps uncertainty of a closer or a title company when they're too busy or they're frustrated. Mm-hmm. My client, a buyer, is probably spending $1,600 to $2,200 on an escrow fee for the closing to take place, and the treatment that you get sometimes is it's just not there. But what you guys have done to sort of make sure that experience for that individual is smooth, comfortable, and we handle the legal side of things to make sure that that's efficient and protected. It just makes for like a great all-around experience.
Excellent. Well, Michael, what's the vision for Mazek Law? I mean, what do you see for the future? Are you just going to continue on the way you've been doing? Do you have growth goals? Are you going to expand? I mean, I know you cover the whole city and suburban area and all that. What's your hope there?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've looked at growth areas on the estate planning side. So when we first started, the estate planning wasn't really that active of an area. In the last few years in particular, there's been a real need to make sure that people's estate plans are in place. And so for us, we just look at it as an extension of what we're doing, which is protecting assets. Mm-hmm. So your real estate purchase, that's your most important, perhaps, asset that you own. How do you protect it if you were to pass away? Who gets the benefits of your estate? How do you protect other assets? What do you do if you are a real estate investor? How do you protect those assets? How do you make sure that you don't get sued individually? So those are, I think our growth is really connected to ancillary areas of real estate.
Expanding your service to your existing clients and customer base.
Yeah, exactly. And we have,
great.
We've reached out to our current clients quite a bit, and they've reached out to us. We have a pretty good return rate with our clients. Our clients usually will want to reach out to us for other areas, even things that we don't cover. In that scenario, we refer it out. But I think our growth will probably be in the area of estate planning and property tax appeals. Those are areas where we've added staff to make sure that we've got coverage, and that we'll expand in those directions. And then I'll obviously focus pretty significantly on transactions.
Yeah, and you still have room. I know there's a bunch of agents that work with you and love you, really prominent, high-producing agents in the city, but you have room for more.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we love working with agents, especially an agent that we haven't worked with in the past. I always find that we can customize our treatment of a real estate transaction to what they're trying to do and the goals that they have as a real estate brokerage or a team or an individual. So, when we work with newer agents, we'll ask, hey, do you want us to do this? Is this something that fits in with what you're doing? Even things like, how do you get seller proceeds? Do you, the agent, want to deliver the proceeds from a sale to your seller? Is that a bit of a red carpet event for you? Or do you want signings to occur in your office as opposed to my office? Those are all things that we can customize to make it closer to their brand. If we're getting a referral from an agent and we don't necessarily know the client, we're obviously going to represent the client aggressively and make sure the client's happy. But that agent should have a signature on that as well.
That's great. That's powerful. That recognizes the kind of the order of business, right? In some ways, and I think some attorneys, they might view the agent as incidental or whatever. But I love the way, and I think it shows the way you prioritize agents. Yeah,
and it's such that team element too is so huge when the client feels like they're working with this agent, but this is our inspector, this is our attorney, and and we're all here together and working in concert in many scenarios. So whether it's an inspection is taking place, we're waiting on radon results, so we don't send the attorney review letter until the radon result. So now all of a sudden it's this group of people that are working for you, as opposed to, well, this is my agent, and then these are the people that the agent hires. So it makes it a more complete experience.
That's cool. So Mike, you mentioned you're into you call them nerdy things.
Yeah, definitely.
And so you invest in legal documents. So talk a little bit about that.
This is where people will start tuning out of the podcast.
No, I think they'll start tuning in here.
So I've always been, growing up, I'd collect sports memorabilia and baseball cards mainly and things like that. But in the legal world, especially doing estate planning and probate work, I became interested in certain old legal documents. So even sometimes photographs or things like that related to Chicago history. So if you come by my office at 3805 North Lincoln, you can poke around and see some of the stuff that I've acquired over the years. And once you get on a list for an auction site where you bought, for example, a picture of the St. Patrick's Day Parade in 1964 in Chicago, it's almost like there's an alert that goes on behind the scenes, like, well, this guy is going to buy it. So then you get bombarded with emails from all these auction sites. And so I've acquired, on the sports side of things, I've bought old letters from Shoeless Joe Jackson's attorney to Shoeless Joe Jackson.
Wow.
You know,
pretty cool.
yeah, fun stuff, just fun stuff to look at.
Mhm.
I enjoy it. It's really interesting stuff. It's part of
We
history.
might do a follow-up podcast.
In the
where we're
office?
actually in your office.
Yeah, I gotta-
Yeah, and you can give us a tour. You got to clean it up.
I
though.
probably gotta clean some
Yeah.
stuff. Yeah, we've got some stuff laying around that probably
Right.
needs to go in the storage. But yeah, so that's the kind of stuff that I collect. And so a while back, I got on a list where I was able to come across some soccer cards. And I know that soccer cards are actually kind of rare these days. In many
Absolutely.
stores,
Very popular,
They're
too.
selling out and things like that. But I don't know anything about soccer cards, so I figured I'd bring the cards.
We're
that
gonna
we
open
got,
them up here.
and we're gonna combine. You know, for some of the folks that collect cards, they do these breaks online where you get a few packs. Steve, we're gonna split this up, so
Okay.
you're getting whatever you get is what you get.
Wow.
And
Exciting. I wonder if I'd get my card.
I'd have to
Yeah.
call the manufacturer
So
if that's the
you know
case. They've made an error.
So if you're listening to this and you're listening for any kind of self-improvement content going forward here, you're probably going to be a little disappointed. But this is exciting from this. So what's your most, while we're opening, what's your most valuable sports memorabilia that you have?
I've got a Jordan rookie.
Okay.
And the 86-87 Fleer rookie card. That's near and dear to me. But honestly, some of the more interesting cards are cards where you hung out with friends and you pulled a great card. And this is something, by the way, that, you know, like sports cards kind of fell off the map for a little while, and then during the pandemic started to become very, very valuable again.
Okay. So this guy, Pedri, you know, so I'm not a total aficionado of European soccer players, but this guy I know for sure, Firmino,
Yeah,
from Liverpool.
and I should mention that these are, I mean, there's a lot of packs. I don't know if we're going to go
Yeah,
over
we don't
all
have to
of
open
this
them all.
But this is
Yeah,
2021
on air.
Champions League pack. I found that this is kind of a fun way to
Steve
kill some
Kempf. I'm kidding. Manchester United. You know, Mike, so how much is the Jordan rookie worth?
It goes up and down, but it's a couple grand.
Okay.
So, but mine's not in great condition. There are ones that are in incredible condition. It's like $100,000 and all that. But and those are going up in value tremendously. In fact, if your family has some old cards in the attic somewhere, now's probably a good time to check them out, see how much they're worth. They're probably worth a decent amount of money these days. Even things like Pokemon cards or comic books, sort of these tangible items that are nostalgic, part of our history, they all went up in value significantly.
Well, so I'll tell you a quick story that
Yeah.
me and my brothers, when we were teenagers, we went and saw Michael Jordan's first basketball game against the Washington Bullets
Is that right?
at the Chicago Stadium.
Do you have a ticket?
And so my brother Dave says, "Hey, did you see the Jordan's first game ticket just sold? It was like 30 grand, right?
Yeah.
Or whatever." And let us know if you get anything valuable.
No problem.
So anyway, so my brother says, "I still got mine," and I was
Really?
like, "Oh, interesting. I'll see if I got mine." So I'm looking through the shoebox, you know, Van Halen, Journey, Rush. I got all my concert tickets. I had my ticket to the game,
You
and
have?
my brother Jeff did as well.
Is
So
it in good condition?
it was in decent. We auctioned them off.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So the most we got for one of the tickets was just over 13 grand.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a ticket that was just sitting
Yeah,
in a
and
shoebox
it
somewhere.
looked awful too. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I couldn't even get it. The reason, the latest ticket I think went for over 270,000, but they were able to be encased and off. I forget what the
Yeah,
thing is, but
yeah.
you send it off somewhere to have it.
Yeah, so they guarantee like the
Yeah,
condition.
yeah,
or
they
whatever.
guarantee the condition or whatever.
Yeah.
Mine couldn't be authenticated because I bought it from Ticketmaster instead of at the gate. So if you buy it from Ticketmaster, your ticket will not be as valuable if you're at some special game than buying it at the gate or from the stadium.
Yeah, that's strange because
Yeah.
those Ticketmaster outlets, I remember my first Bulls game that I went to in the 80s. I lived in Portage Park area of Chicago, and my mom and I went to the Sears at Six Corners, and the Sears had a Ticketmaster location. That's where I got you would get tickets at Ticketmaster outlets around the city as opposed to at the
Yes.
venue. But yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, that the tickets.
That guy could be valuable right here. Ramos, Sergio Ramos.
All
He's
right.
probably not. He's not Messi, but anyway.
But yeah, concert tickets too are part of that also. Like I've seen a lot of that stuff trade for quite a bit. And
Really?
And the some of it is a bit more local. So, for instance, like if a band, like a ticket for the Double Door for like a local band,
Right, like Smashing Pumpkins
right,
and
right.
Cubby Bear or something like that.
Yeah, I was just gonna say Smashing Pumpkins. That has significant value here locally, not so much in Nevada or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's and that's we've actually done from an estate planning standpoint. We've now, when we put together a list of things we want to make specific gifts for, if somebody's if they're going to pass something on, not necessarily to their spouse or their kids, but they know, hey, my nephew is really into Pokemon cards,
Mm-hmm.
and that's another collectible that's gone up tremendously in value. So there are sections of our estate plans where we make specific gifts, and we kind of highlight some of those types of things to be passed on to somebody else.
Wow. Well, okay, Michael, thank you for being with us on the podcast. Mike Mazek, attorney and collector and social butterfly,
Mediocre soccer player.
media mogul as well,
Right,
to some degree.
yeah.
So this is People Not Titles podcast, signing off. We appreciate your viewership, and if you're an agent looking for a great attorney, look no further than Mike Mazek.
Yeah, or if you just want to play soccer.
Or if you want to play soccer, there you go. Love it. Thank you.
Thanks.
See ya.